On this channel, we've uncovered some massive disasters that often end in the regulation of rules and safety policies. It's sort of like when you see an obvious warning sign on a product. Danger, do not swallow. At some point, somebody had to have swallowed this thing and died, right? What tragedy had to occur to put these safety procedures into place? Today, we talk about the origin of women and children first. Let's discuss what happened to the SS Arctic. Transatlantic shipping was the revolutionary transition from short-range to long-range shipping. Said it couldn't be done. Ships were originally outfitted with a sail and unable to travel across the oceans, at least not with significant amount of cargo. When the theory was disproved in 1838 with the crossing of two steamer ships, a new frontier of steamline ships crossing the ocean was unleashed. It cut down the crossing from 5 to 6 weeks to only 14 hours or so. Truly, a step forward for oceanic traversing. Enter the SS Arctic, a paddle steamboat that was launched in 1949. Constructed with a wooden hull, the ship was 284 feet, or 87 meters long, weighing in at 2,856 tons. The ship had 3 auxiliary sail masts, a single funnel, and steam engine powering the 2 paddle wheels. Outfitted with cabins for passenger travel, the ship went on its first voyage in 1850 under the command of 49-year-old veteran Captain James Luce. It was built with 3 other ships, all owned by the American company Collins Line, but due to it being the fastest and most luxurious, the Arctic was the most celebrated of them all. It looked like the Arctic had a long and thriving future ahead of it. However, we all know this channel isn't about things that went well. On September 20th, 1854, the SS Arctic left Liverpool bound for New York with 233 passengers on board, roughly 100 of them being women and children. Some of these passengers were family to the ship's owners and captain, as well as financial backers. On top of that, there were 175 crew members, so it was a rather full voyage, buzzing with life. The ship had undergone some changes that year, mainly an alteration in the engines to burn coal more efficiently. On the downside, the hull took more damage from them, requiring some more maintenance, but the ship was running more efficiently than ever. At noon on September 27th, Captain Luce calculated the ship was roughly 50 miles southeast of Cape Race in Newfoundland. Shortly after, the Arctic sailed into a bank of fog, where the lookout crew quickly saw the shape of a steamer bearing down at them at about 10 knots. The vessel was a French steamer known as the Vesta, which was transporting fishermen from Canada to France at the end of the fishing season. Captain Luce returned to the deck as he heard the alarm sounding, but it was too late. The Vesta's iron bow pierced into the wooden hull of the Arctic before snapping off. The impact was light, and at first passengers and crew of the Arctic were unfazed, thinking that the smaller Vesta was the doomed ship. However, the Vesta had a metal hull with interior compartments fit to handle such a collision to stay afloat. The Arctic slowly circled the Vesta, making sure that the French steamer was okay with no thoughts of checking on their own hull. They even gave up 1 lifeboat full of 6 crew to help out in any way they could. Soon, however, the Vesta was considered fine, but Captain Luce noticed the Arctic was moving strangely, listing to one side and paddling infrequently in the water. Perhaps everything wasn't okay. Upon further inspection, debris from the Vesta's metal stem and anchor were found in the ship's hull, creating holes both above and below the waterline. Unlike the Vesta, the Arctic was not outfitted with water-bearing compartments, just a large open space from front to back. It was taking on water fast, and the crew had to act. As panic began to rise in the crew and passengers, Captain Luce attempted to staunch the flow of water with one of the auxiliary sails. Unfortunately, the iron stem jammed into the hull tore right through it, and time was wasting away. The ship's carpenter attempted to shove mattresses and benches into the holes, but they were now out of reach under the water. When it became obvious that the ship was going to sink, the crew began to get less organized and rebellious. Captain Luce knew that time wasn't on their side if they wanted to make it to any shore before the ship sank, so he ordered full speed ahead, consequently running over the lifeboat that had been launched to help the Vesta and killing all but one of the dozen occupants on board. By 1 p.m., the Arctic had taken on so much water that the engine fires were being extinguished and it was barely moving. They had to abandon the Vesta in order to make this sprint to land, but now they found themselves with no land and no help nearby. They were quite literally dead in the water. Captain Luce ordered that the remaining 5 lifeboats be deployed, and while they could safely hold only half the people on board, all the women and children could have been saved. Could have been. Luce did his best to try to get the women and children on the boats first, but order on the ship was falling apart. Male passengers and crew quickly pushed past women and children to fill the boats, and despite the captain ordering that the boats remain alongside the ship, they quickly rowed away. Passengers left to fend for themselves tried to fashion rafts out of any wood they could pull from the ship. Some tried to cling to the damaged ship as it sank, but the waters were rigid and any hope of surviving was slim. With the lifeboats gone, Captain Luce ordered a trainee engineer, Mr. Stuart Hallward, to go to the bow and fire the ship's single cannon every minute in hopes of attracting other vessels' attention. He'd do as he was told, but didn't survive the sinking. True to his role, Captain Luce was determined to go down with the ship. Those still on board knew their fate and huddled together to sing hymns and recite scripture. At 4:45 p.m., just 4.5 hours after the collision, Hallward fired the cannon for the last time, and the Arctic sank into the cold waters, stem first, taking all the remaining passengers and crew with it. Captain James Luce stood atop a starboard paddle box and waited for his fate, but miraculously enough, it wouldn't be the end for him that day. Once under the water, the structure broke loose and rose to the surface, giving the captain something to cling to until he was rescued by a passing ship 2 days later. He was able to stay safe there with 11 others. The best estimate is that 350 people died that day. Those who survived consisted of 24 male passengers and 60 crew members, which outlines just how selfish and disorderly this ship's crew was. Through telegraphs and the Vesta reaching Canada to tell of what happened, word was spreading fast that there was a ship that might need help out there. Several vessels were launched in search for survivors of the Arctic, finding only those fortunate enough to still be alive. Captain Luce was praised as a hero, while his crew was disgraced, some never returning to the U.S. again. This disaster was met with outrage as to how the women and children were met, all of which who didn't survive, putting into place the tradition that now any sinking vessel requires women and children be safely secured first. From tragedy comes order. Thanks for watching. And thank you for the Twitter follower who requested this story be covered. They tell me that they are a descendant of the Collins family, and I think that's pretty great. Game with me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.